So my name's Suzanne McArthur. My background, I'm an occupational therapist by profession, but left the NHS about 12 years ago and moved into the hospice sector, where I worked in Marie Curie for about 8 years, 8, 9 years, as a manager and in community engagement, and then moved to Birmingham Hospice as head of community development and partnerships, where I worked there for 2 years, working with the diverse communities of Birmingham, looking at how, as a hospice, we could engage better with those communities and meet their needs in a more culturally sensitive and appropriate way. And
And
then I was made redundant from there 2 years ago, no, a year ago. And I set up my own company, Evolve and Flourish, and a CIC, Thriving Connections, which is all around developing compassionate communities.
great. Thank you very much. So the thing I really want to hear about is when you have gone into communities, into the various communities that you've worked in, uh, what have you found that you have learned and you think would be of benefit for um, for a reason why other palliative care professionals should bother to go into community?
So, having been a manager within the hospice setting, I was really clear, or I could just see it, that actually, as a hospice provider, palliative care service provider, we thought we're the expert, and that communities should fit in to our service, that we knew what the communities needed, and yeah, they should fit in. And it wasn't surprising that actually the majority of people that were accessing our services were white middle class. Um, and the opportunity for me to go out and actually meet and consult with those communities about what good end of life care looked like for them and what good grief support looked like for them actually really opened my eyes, that actually we weren't doing it right at all. There was a totally different focus on what was important to that community that wasn't what we were delivering as palliative care providers. We were missing some real golden nuggets. So, our palliative care services were all focused on symptom control, um, looking at, obviously supporting that patient and their family through that journey, but in the way that we thought that they needed it. We'd got our systems in place, people that we would refer them to based upon what we thought was best. Um, and what I found was actually that's not what they wanted. There were things that weren't even on our radar, but they didn't want those day services that we were providing, because actually what they needed and wanted was to be in their own community and actually being supported by people, as they would say, looked like them and got it. So they wanted their own community to be delivering that palliative care support that actually, as hospices, we were, we were specialised. We didn't need to be delivering half of the stuff that we were trying to deliver, because the communities had got those assets already there, willing and waiting to be upskilled to deliver that level of care and support themselves. And that's what they wanted out in
So,
the community, delivered by their own.
so can you tell us about the kind of supports that already existed in those communities, um, so that people can have some kind of idea about all the stuff that's already going on?
Yeah. So, I was absolutely blown away. I worked with the Nishkam Association in Birmingham, which is a Sikh community. And, I describe them as they're compassionate communities on speed. They are, I came out absolutely blown away. And I was like, actually, you should be teaching us, because, you've got it. They got their own volunteers who were delivering GP support, pharmacy support, counselling support. These were all volunteers with, assets within their community that were delivering this free to their local community and providing that support. They'd got a day service. I'm going to compare it to a hospice. They've got a day service where they invited their elders to join them, and they were going through end of life planning. They'd even developed an end of life planning book that they were working through with their elders in the community to look around and focus on, let's start conversations about what your wishes are at end of life and what does that mean and what does that look like to you. They'd got that. They'd got this amazing book that I ended up taking back to the hospice and saying, actually, this is amazing. This is, why are we duplicating this? Actually, they're doing it better than us. They'd got activities going on for their communities that, that they were clear that they wanted to educate them about end of life planning. And all they needed was some guidance and some connections to help add quality and depth to what was already there. They'd got the foundations, they'd got solid foundations.
And what do you think the benefits for palliative care services would be if they integrated more with communities?
So you have this awful saying, don't you, that people, communities are hard to reach. We know that's not a fact, and it's totally rubbish. By, palliative care services, working with communities, you're integrating into that community. You learn what is important to them. What does good end of life look like for that community? It's going to be very different to what good end of life looks like for you as a service. So it's about knowing what that looks like. They can teach you so much, I say, depth and information that you just don't get unless you're integrated and working with that community. They'll share with you what, I'm going to say what good care provision looks like within that family unit, what is culturally appropriate, what isn't appropriate, where faith runs through their end of life care planning with the Sikh community. Their day services, when I was working with them to develop look at how we could, I'm going to say, bolt on, add some extra tools into their day services to give it a little bit more depth. What they wanted, they didn't want the symptom control things, but what was key for them was that forgiveness was threaded throughout their program, and that's what they wanted their program on, was to get their elders from a stage of where they were to a stage of complete forgiveness so they could transition to the next life. That's what was important to them. And unless palliative care teams go into different communities, ask the question and go in not thinking that we're experts, but going in wanting to learn, actually we can shape the service provision that's needed for that specialist care. So it is much more appropriate and culturally sensitive, but also we can learn what that community can do for themselves.
I know that you did some work with a prison in Birmingham, and that you co-produced a package that would help the prisoners look after people in their community, which is their prison, who had life-limiting illness. Do you want to just say a little bit about that, about how you kind of helped stimulate caring capacity within the prison?
Yeah, so that was focused much more around the grief, supporting their peers who were coping with grief and loss. So as part of our Compassionate City Charter, obviously there was a pillar that focused on prisons, and me being me, I like to poke the bear. So I spoke to the CEO of the hospice at the time and said, actually, this is a strand I'd like to work on. And he was happy for us to do that. So we went in to the prison and spoke with the inmates, a group of inmates who had already got some skills, that they were sort of volunteers, wellbeing volunteers within the prison, so they could provide that wellbeing to their peer inmates. And we spoke to them about their experiences of grief and loss and the support that was in place. And it was really clear that services were coming in to deliver that support, but actually they were failing because of the capacity demands. The staffing levels were atrocious, just the environment in itself. And we sat with them and actually asked them, what would good grief support look like for you? And they were without a shadow of doubt, they were unanimous in saying that they wanted to be able to be skilled to deliver that support to their peers. And what struck me most was the level of compassion that these men had for each other. That, you know, these men were incarcerated for crimes, and I had my prejudgments, and I was absolutely blown away by the compassion that these men had. And they wanted to be upskilled to provide that support for their peers because they could see the struggles that these men were having in that environment to cope with the losses from the outside world and from losing, you know, peers behind bars as well.
And what did they come up with?
So we co-developed with them a half-day training session that basically pulled in the basics of grief awareness so they could understand what grief and loss look like, how it presents itself in behaviours and symptoms, so they could spot it and support and talk through the experiences their peers were having. They wanted to know how to have a compassionate conversation, what was the right thing to say, what was the things they should avoid saying, where they could signpost them for resources. And they also wanted to set up a grief cafe that was going to be a safe space for their peers to come and talk about their grief and loss, because obviously there was this lack of trust sharing some of that personal stuff with prison staff. And that's what they wanted, and that's what it developed into, a half-day training that, you know, I ran several sessions and trained one of the mental health workers there to continue to deliver that. The ideal would have been we train some of the inmates to do it, but it was the prison setting was probationary, so they moved through. The throughput was far too quick to train anybody that was going to be there long term, but hoping that they all took those skills on to the next prison that they went to and back into the community.
Brilliant. Thank you. And if you are a practicing palliative care clinician, either palliative care specialist, nurse, or doctor, why would you recommend that that they should go into community? How would that benefit them in doing their job better?
Because I think it's a case of you don't know what you don't know. And I think if we don't explore, if we don't talk to communities and find out what is important to them in all aspects of end of life and grief, we never know what it is that they need. And we'll carry on trying to put a square peg in a round hole, or a round peg in a square hole, and wonder why the people who always, you know, are referred to our services or come into those services are going to predominantly be white middle class. You're never going to change the record if you carry on doing what you're doing. Yeah. We can't expect people from different cultural backgrounds, different communities, to understand what palliative care services are. I mean, Joe Public doesn't understand palliative care, let alone diverse communities, what they offer. And yeah, we've got to be out there, we've got to be engaged, and we've got to be pulling them and working with them rather than expecting people to just use.
There's a thought that palliative care services have an offer, and that offer is appropriate for every community. But actually, the way that we practice and the way that we work can be inappropriate. And so for a clinician going into community, so I'm asking, how will it benefit the clinician?
We work very much on a asset-based community development approach. There are so many skills and assets within communities that exist that, and we don't look at those. We come in and think that as service providers, we've got it. We know what they want, and if we could go out, we can deliver it, and the problem will be solved. And it's not. There's so much depth and diversity within communities and skills and traditions and rituals that we don't know about that are really important to those communities to enable them to have a good experience of death and a good experience of grief. That as service providers, I don't think it's even our place to go and deliver some of that stuff. That's a community delivery is something that they can do themselves. I suppose there's that bit of imposing our own beliefs and thoughts on other communities, and it's inappropriate.
So as a practicing palliative care clinician, if I then go and have a conversation with my kind of palliative care hat on in diverse communities, the way that I deliver that clinical practice might be inappropriate.
Yeah, it may well be inappropriate. Well, they won't want it because it will be inappropriate.
Okay.
But by going out and engaging with them and talking with them and having curious conversations, you find out actually this, there is a need, but I can't fill it by what I'm doing now. What I've now learned is I need to adapt whatever that delivery is and either include the community in that delivery, or I adapt my style and my approach to meet those needs.
Brilliant.
I'd say don't be scared of going out into communities and just asking. That's the easiest way to do it, is to just go out and ask, what does good end of life care look like for you? I'll go out to people and, communities I've never met. And it's a privilege to meet the different communities and hear from them. But, that simple question of what does good end of life care look like for you? Or what does good grief support look like for you? There's no hesitation in people telling you. It's just that nobody's gone out and asked them.
Brilliant.